Well, the Conservatives have come at Mark Carney over his conflict of interest, and we as Canadians want to know that our Prime Minister is not having interest in other countries and steering us the wrong way, though there's a lot of contradiction in what Mark Carney has to say. Welcome to the Canadian Shield. My name's Sterling. I'm your host. Canadians have had some time to digest what the Liberal Party is attempting to push onto them, even though they claim that it's happening really quickly. Mark Carney is looking like he wants to be installed by all of the insider of the Liberal Party. He's had his claws in the pie now for many years, and just because he's been behind the scenes. He's making a lot of promises to people that he could never keep all of them because he's making opposite promises to the voter base. Like he's telling Quebec one thing, and then he's telling Alberta a different thing, and those two things could never possibly both be true. Of course, he has a lot of investments, and he works in investment firms. That's what he does. You know the word BlackRock, which is just a company that takes a hold of other people's money and puts it in investments, and that's exactly what Mark Carney does. He has a lot of houses that he owns in the United States. In fact, most his business is based in New York. So many of these issues that Donald Trump is raising doesn't impact him, but it does impact Canada. And there are plenty of questions around whether or not Mark Carney's business runs in opposition or contradiction to the conflict of interest that runs with Canadian interests. Certainly when we have the tape of him telling Pierre Poilievre that canceling the Northern Gateway pipeline and canceling the Energy East pipeline was the right decision. And now he's on the microphone trying to convince you that he's going to start building pipelines going east and west, when most of the customers that have been lost that were available have been lost. Now, I'm sure that we can recoup that. But we are looking at a man who is saying one thing and doing another, and then now, many years later, trying to tell you that what he said before doesn't add up. And this is coming from the same group that if you put up a mean tweet in 2005, they would want you to be fired from your job and all of your life torn to shreds. And yet, for some reason, they can't even find the wherewithal to keep their own leadership accountable for words they said just a couple of years ago about the same issue, and how the contradiction is very stark. I'm going to open up with some of the things that the Conservatives are talking about, and how there's a lot of contradiction and there's a lot of unsupervised access that Mark Carney is looking forward to having as Prime Minister of Canada, without ever having been vetted and found out what kind of economic revenues he's generating that may run in direct conflict with the Canadian or the public or Canada's best interests. Oil and steel being two big ones.
Carbon tax, Carney, must come clean with Canadians about potential conflicts of interest and all of his business dealings. We're in a very interesting and troubling place for Canadians, with Carbon tax Carney having been a senior advisor appointed by Justin Trudeau to advise him, but done in such a way to shield him from all of the standard and customary accountability. Justin Trudeau gave Mark Carney all of the power and none of the accountability that comes with it.
So there we heard Conservative MP Michael Barrett talking about how the conflict of interest of Mark Carney being Prime Minister is something that needs to be examined long before he be given the mantle of Prime Minister. And I have to agree. I would think that if anybody is going to be, I don't care if you want to be the leader of the Liberal Party, that has to be something that we need to know. You want to be the leader of the party, you're going to have to already have been vetted. When you think of the amount of times that the far left stands up and screams that Pierre Poilievre needs to get a security clearance, and yet you want to give Mark Carney, the man who says that we have to go green, the greenest country on earth, has to do more, while he invests in pipelines in other countries, tells Canadians that pipelines are not needed, while he invests in other industries that may be in direct competition with Canada, while he puts his money in China, a country that we know is flooding Canada with cheap subsidized products. How can he be prime minister if he has all of these great contradictions between what his businesses are earning and what's best for Canadians? I think that the Conservatives are making a very strong point, and I think me and you as Canadians need to appreciate that no matter what the loopholes say, this is not right. And that's what really matters. It's not about whether or not you found a way to pull it off. That just means that you're devious enough to find some way through it. That just means that you're taking advantage and exploiting people's generosity and kindness. That's not the kind of person that you want to be telling yourself that this is our leader. I mean, that rings of some of these Middle Eastern warlords that the government spent so long taking apart, where they just exploit their way in and then they never give up. Mark Carney boasts about how he's an industrialist, an elitist, and a globalist. So Canada, whose economy is in a tatters, whose economy is only going to get worse here any minute now because of all of the industry that's going to flood south. And the tariffs were just the nail in the coffin of that. Much of it was going to go south nonetheless, because the structure of Canada is such that they are just going to be able to make money by putting their industry just on the other side of the border and drive it back in a truck. So any of the infrastructure that we may have had, of course, is right now making its way into the United States to take advantage, of all of those great tax rates. There is method, there is a way that we as Canadians can get out of this mess, but we can't do it with a socialist government. We can't do it with a government that thinks that they're going to have control of every single move that you make, and we have 100 times the government, and everything's a delay and everything's a stall, just like we've been having right now. I mean, they proudly talk about how they dumped $8 billion into the Housing Accelerator Fund, and they needed to build 1 million houses a year for the next 5 years, or nearly. Anyway, it was like 750,000. They're like 200,000. So all of their bureaucracy is not solving the issue, and we as Canadians need to let them know that it doesn't matter what they think. It matters what we think.
I just want to address Mark Carney's comments where he was downplaying the opioid crisis that is facing that Canadians are suffering from. Nearly 50,000 Canadians have lost their lives. Fathers and mothers have lost children. People have lost siblings as a direct result of the 9 years of Carney-Trudeau soft on drugs, soft on crime approach. A direct result of the Carney-Trudeau Liberals giving out free opioids, legalizing drug use in public spaces. And to downplay that, to refuse to call it a crisis and just call it a challenge, shows you that he doesn't have to deal with these types of consequences of these policies. He lives in a completely different world. He doesn't have to buy groceries in tough neighborhoods or take public transit. And he made those comments 2 days ago, and yesterday he was in Vancouver, didn't get a single question from the media on this. So why isn't the media holding Mark Carney to account? He's about to become the Prime Minister because a small group of Liberal Party members are going to install him. The least you can do is cover the way he's treating these important issues that are facing Canadians, putting Canada first. If you look at the conversation right now, again, Mark Carney was in Regina. He was talking about steel and getting our energy to markets. This is a guy who applauded canceling major energy projects that would have made us less dependent on the United States. The Carney-Trudeau Liberal approach has made Canada more vulnerable by telling our allies that we're not going to sell them our clean and ethical LNG. That's ridiculous. The Carney Liberal approach has made Canada more vulnerable and more dependent on the United States.
Now, the first question that comes to my head is, maybe Mark Carney's outfit's own money have investments in these pharmaceutical companies that are manufacturing this so-called safe supply that is generating all of the destruction in the various parts of this country, the various cities of this country, cities that Mark Carney wishes to only make more dents, right? He doesn't want to spread the problem out. He wants to cram everybody in there. I always like to say so that he can turn Algonquin into one of his private game reserves, like back in the old barren days of the dark ages of Europe, which I truly believe the model that they have in their mind is that before the Magna Carta. However, it would come out in the economic vetting, in the disclosures, if he had a conflict of interest with these narcotics companies or with these oil companies. Aside from that, though, I believe that it was a very this is why I know that Mark Carney is not an outsider, because he doesn't talk to the independent media. And in addition to that, the word challenge was used 100,000 times inside of the House of Commons. Like, if I heard the Liberals say it once, we have an economy challenge, we have an inflation challenge, we have, that's the word that they like to use because that's the word that tested well. Right? They want people to hear the word challenge as opposed to a crisis, as opposed to a problem, because in your mind, you're going to rise to the challenge. This is not the kind of thing that you should be, comparing to the destruction of people's lives. That's a just very unconscionable sort of use of the word. And the establishment media that is part of the same establishment as Mark Carney should be calling him out on that. But they aren't. They gave him a pass. They're trying to attack the Conservatives yet again. For what? For saying that we believe that the Prime Minister of the country should be well vetted? To saying that the way that the Liberal government has handled things is terrible? I mean, what exactly do you think that you're going to change? Because Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau are carbon copies of each other. So there's really no difference in taking one out and putting one in. And it has done nothing to improve the economy. I shop. I'm a one-man show. I do all of the shopping in my household. And everything has gone up about 25 to 50 cents. Everything. All the essentials especially. So that quietly has ticked up, and we will see more. The carbon tax will come in here any minute now, in another 4 or 5 weeks. And that will also cause food to rise. Housing is still becoming scarce. Nothing has changed while the Liberal Party and the media has tried to turn this into a circus. Meanwhile, Canadians suffer and go through a lot of trouble because all of the people who call themselves leaders in this country are leading us to destruction. They're not leading us to prosperity. And they want to do it and then tell themselves that if anybody complains about it, the problem isn't that they led us to destruction. The problem is that somebody's talked about it. It's the same thing we've been dealing with for 10 years. It's just a theater. We want problems to be solved. People know what a solved problem looks like. They're not stupid. Of course, you wouldn't get that answer from the Liberal Party. It seems to think that we're all dumb as toast. They held this security conference a couple of days ago in Germany. And apparently they do it every couple of years. And Melanie Joly went because we were still represented by this flaccid Liberal government. And she was up there talking like she knows Donald Trump so well. They're like cousins, or, they chummed around one another. And of course, Donald Trump has made no secret of his dislike of the Liberal Party. And the Liberal Party stood in Canada for years and mocked Donald Trump. She ran all over the Middle East and mocked the United States. So I don't know where she thinks she's got a leg to stand on. However, they opened by talking about some of Donald Trump's tariffs that he's going on, some of the tactics that he's using around the world. It's not just Canada. Don't let the corporate media keep you in the dark. The reality is that he has sent these tariffs against all sorts of countries. And he's taken on the EU en bloc. But I want you to hear, this was in her opening statement.
Now, we all know that for the new president in the United States, tariffs are both an expression of the injustice that he feels the United States suffers as other countries take advantage of its more open economy, as he sees it, as well as, in his words, a great lever to get a better deal from other countries. And he's not entirely wrong on both of those. If you take the case of India, with average trade-weighted tariffs of 12%, while the US has 2.2%, it does look unfair to some in the US. And the announcement of his tariffs has led to a rapid negotiation where India has agreed to slash duties on everything from Harley-Davidson motorcycles onwards, and also agreed to start importing more US oil and gas. The European Union, and we'll hear more about it, is thinking about reducing car tariffs and also about the supply of oil and gas to Europe from the United States.
The cope coming out of that woman, where in one breath she'll try to say that, he's not entirely wrong, that tariffs are effective. And then she'll mention how he got everything that he wanted by threatening a tariff. So I know that they're trying to paint him as some kind of a villain because they really believe somehow in their mind they're going to turn people away from the desire to have a prosperous life. These elitists, these rich people who think that your life is no harder than theirs. And so, you should be able to pick on Donald Trump because you don't like money in your life. Only their lives, not your lives. The thing that I want to make fun of is how they're considering taking the tariffs off American vehicles, and they're going to buy American oil. And as we know, much of the American oil in the current model that's going to be exported will have begun its journey in Canada. But because of Mark Carney, because of Justin Trudeau and the far left desires to try and cripple the Canadian economy, we don't have the ability to sell that oil directly into Europe and make that money ourselves. So we're selling it to the Americans at an enormous discount. They're going to turn around and sell it now to Europe, Japan, and India. Now, here's my issue with talking about India. First of all, we have a leader of the opposition, not the opposition, we have an opposition party member who is not allowed into India. He's banned from entering India because of his radical statements on Khalistan. We have Justin Trudeau, who stood up in the House of Commons and basically slammed the Indian government and called them every name in the book corrupt and all of that stuff. And as far as I last heard, there still has been no evidence put forward. So there is another opportunity for Canadian oil that could have gone to India. We have plenty of people in India. Of course, we know that India probably would deal differently with Pierre Poilievre than they do with the Liberal government, especially if you know or understand the culture. And I've lived in Mississauga and I lived there for quite an extensive amount of time. And I can tell you that for them to say, oh, we're putting a tariff on your country and they already have hammered out a deal, that indicates to me that they were getting a good deal and they were willing to make the concession to continue the business model. Because you can say whatever you want about them, like you've heard Russell Peters make all the jokes about how they're cheap and all of that stuff, but they like to negotiate solid deals. They're tough negotiators, and they like to have a deal where everybody walks away feeling like they have been successful. And that's, something that obviously has happened, or else Donald Trump would still be telling them that they need to pay more money on the tariffs. But they said, no, it's okay. You know what? Tell you what, we're going to do whatever it is. And I don't know the ins and outs of the deal, but I can assure you that if both Donald Trump and India agreed that there should be a deal renegotiated, and they've already taken care of it within a couple of weeks, that means that every side agreed that the money wasn't right. They were just being honest with one another. Of course, Canada lost out on that deal because we have a government, like I said, that one part of the government, the guy's not permitted into India because of his position on Khalistan. Another part of the government has stood up in the House of Commons and insulted them and slandered them. And the support behind all of those governments canceled our possibility to sell India any kind of an oil. And remember, by selling India oil from the United States, again, they're selling Canadian oil that's been reproduced or been processed and resold. In addition to that, India buys a lot of their oil from Russia. So how is that fitting in? I think what really matters is not that they're getting some supply from Russia and some supply from the United States. I think what's important to see is that this is a country that it needs so much oil, it's buying it from at least two different sources. And we have a Liberal government, Mark Carney, just Chrystia Freeland as well. Don't think for one second that Karina Gould didn't stand up in the House of Commons and call everybody an ist or a climate denier because they think that we should have put those pipelines in. They said there was no business model. We still have Quebec running around saying that they're not going to have a pipeline running across their land. Okay, so you don't like money. You feel like you're rich enough. Or maybe you think that the equalization payment is enough. Well, I think that it's time that we take a look at both of those issues. The one thing we can take away from the statement of that lady at the security conference is that Donald Trump is, without a doubt, 100% being heard around the world as being reasonable and fair, and that everybody's giving him what he asked for because it's just exactly what they would do if the shoe was reversed. And you need to remember that when you hear Mark Carney and the corporate media trying to convince you that somehow we're going to be able to take on our only neighbor, right? I mean, okay, technically, I guess our landmass might run into Russia, but really, you want to start a fight with the only friend we got, with the only neighbor we got, so that you can win some votes. That's not helping the Canadian public. And all of your track record shows that you have done nothing but destroy the infrastructure of this country. It just seems to me that the far left doesn't understand how to balance the economy, and they don't understand how to make money with infrastructure investment. And I think that no matter where you sit on the spectrum, I just don't know anybody who wakes up in the morning and says, wow, I have too much money, right? I don't know anybody in the middle or the lower classes who stand up and say, geez, I really love the fact that I ran out of money 3 days before my next paycheck is coming in, and I'm wondering if I should put more money on my credit card or go into my overdraft. I don't know anybody like that. So why would not prosperity be your number one choice? Once you have prosperity, the other problems are easy to fix. That's why people with money have such, well, at least apparently, easy lives, because the money fixes so many things. All right, I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.